What if I told you that corruption, poverty, and adulteration are not only prevalent, but thriving in some parts of the world? Yes, it's a harsh reality. In an era where we're making strides in technology, exploring the cosmos, and creating innovative solutions to combat climate change, there are still regions across the globe where corruption, poverty, and adulteration are not just existent, but indeed pervasive. These issues are like a three-headed monster, each head feeding on the others, creating a cycle that is incredibly challenging to break. Corruption, the abuse of public power for private gain, remains a significant obstacle to economic and social development. It is a complex social, political, and economic phenomenon that affects all countries to varying degrees. It undermines democratic institutions, slows economic development, and contributes to governmental instability. Then we have poverty, a state of deprivation, lacking the usual or socially acceptable amount of money or material possessions. Despite progress in reducing extreme poverty, nearly 1 in 10 people still lives on less than $1.90 a day, the internationally agreed poverty line. Adulteration, the act of making something poorer in quality by the addition of another substance, typically an inferior one, is another global issue. This is particularly prevalent in the food industry where lower quality or harmful substances are added to food or other products to increase profits, often at the expense of public health. The criteria used to rank countries in these categories are based on various indicators. For corruption, it's the Corruption Perceptions Index from Transparency International. For poverty, it's the World Bank's Poverty Headcount Ratio. For adulteration, it's a bit more complex as it involves assessing reports from various sources including government bodies, NGOs, and media outlets. All these issues are interconnected, each one exacerbating the others, creating a vicious cycle that's hard to break. But it's not all doom and gloom. Awareness is the first step toward change. Today, we will take a journey through 11 countries that top these unfortunate lists. We start our journey in Nigeria, a country rich in resources but plagued by corruption. Despite its vast oil reserves and teeming population, Nigeria ranks high on the corruption index. This corruption breeds an insidious poverty, with a large chunk of its citizens living below the poverty line. Adulteration, too, is rampant, tainting everything from food to fuel. These issues, deeply entrenched in the system, create a bleak reality for the Nigerian people. The Nigerian people continue to suffer from the ills of corruption, poverty, and adulteration. Next, we travel to Haiti, a country struggling under the weight of extreme poverty. With over half of the population living under the poverty line, the situation is dire. Corruption, deeply rooted in its political system, exacerbates the hardships. Adulteration, particularly in the food and fuel sectors, is a common practice, further undermining the public's trust. Despite its rich culture and resilient people, Haiti, a country with potential, is held back by these crippling issues. Our journey takes us next to Afghanistan, a country torn by war and deeply affected by corruption. According to Transparency International, Afghanistan ranks high on the corruption index, with pervasive bribery and embezzlement. Over half the population lives below the poverty line, struggling daily for basic necessities. Adulteration, especially in the food and drug sectors, is a widespread concern, further aggravating the situation. War-torn Afghanistan continues to struggle with corruption and poverty deeply rooted in its society. We now head to Sudan, a country where corruption and poverty go hand in hand. Ranked high on the corruption index, Sudan grapples with a pervasive culture of bribery and embezzlement. This is coupled with a poverty rate that sees nearly half its population living below the poverty line. Adulteration is rampant, infiltrating basic necessities like food and fuel. Sudan's people bear the brunt of these issues with no immediate solution in sight. Our next stop is Yemen, a country where poverty and corruption are part of everyday life. More than half of Yemen's population lives below the poverty line, struggling to meet even their basic needs. Corruption is endemic, permeating every level of society and government, stifling progress and development. Adulteration, particularly in food and medicine, is rife, exacerbating the hardships faced by the people. Yemen's people continue to suffer in silence, their plight often overlooked by the world. As we continue our journey, we will quickly overview the remaining countries on our list. First on the list is North Korea, a country that is notoriously secretive and heavily controlled by its government. Corruption in North Korea is endemic, with a Transparency International Corruption Perceptions Index score of 14 out of 100. Poverty is widespread, with estimates suggesting that more than half of the population is living in conditions of extreme poverty. The country's isolation and restrictions on trade have led to widespread food adulteration, as citizens struggle to meet their basic needs. Next, we turn to Somalia, a country that has been plagued by conflict and instability for decades. The corruption here is deeply ingrained, with the country ranking last on the Corruption Perceptions Index for several consecutive years. Poverty is also rampant, with over 70% of the population living on less than $2 a day. Food and product adulteration is a common issue, with unregulated markets being a breeding ground for such practices. Zimbabwe is another country where corruption, poverty, and adulteration are widespread. Despite having abundant natural resources, the country's wealth has been severely mismanaged, leading to an economic crisis. The majority of Zimbabweans live in poverty, and corruption is considered a significant problem at all levels of society. Adulteration, particularly of food and fuel, is also a common issue, further exacerbating the struggles of the everyday citizen. Guinea, despite being rich in natural resources, is one of the poorest countries in the world. Corruption is rampant, with funds often misappropriated or embezzled. The poverty rate is high, with over half of the population living below the poverty line. Adulteration of food and other goods is a common problem, with many Guineans having little choice but to purchase these substandard products. Venezuela, once one of the wealthiest countries in Latin America, is now in the midst of a severe economic crisis. Hyperinflation, corruption, and poor economic policies have led to widespread poverty and food shortages. Adulteration is a major concern, with many Venezuelans resorting to consuming unsafe or substandard products out of desperation. Lastly, we have Iraq, a country that has been plagued by conflict and instability for years. Corruption is a major issue, with Iraq ranking as one of the most corrupt countries in the world. Poverty is also a significant problem, with a quarter of the population living in poverty. The ongoing conflict and instability have led to rampant adulteration of goods, as regulation and enforcement are often lacking. These countries, each with their own unique challenges, are a stark reminder of the global issues we face. As we conclude our journey, it's clear that corruption, poverty, and adulteration are pervasive issues that need our attention. We've traversed the landscapes of Nigeria, Haiti, Afghanistan, Sudan, and Yemen, and skimmed through 6 other nations, each battling its own demons. The thread that binds them all is a shared struggle against corruption, the fight for survival amidst crippling poverty, and the battle against adulteration, a silent enemy that undermines economies and erodes trust. These aren't isolated incidents, but systemic issues that mirror a global challenge. It's a reality that demands collective action. The world needs to unite, not just in acknowledgement but in action, to root out corruption, alleviate poverty, and eradicate adulteration. The fight against corruption, poverty, and adulteration begins with awareness. Share this video and let's spark a conversation that leads to change.